14 of chapter 13. 13:14. Lay a little context for this. So in Exodus 13:14 it says, in the days to come, when your sons ask you, what does this mean? Say to him, with a mighty hand the Lord brought us out of Egypt, out of the land of slavery. And when Pharaoh stubbornly refused to let us go, the Lord killed the firstborn of both people and animals in Egypt. And this is why I sacrifice to the Lord the first male offspring of every womb, and redeem each of my firstborn sons. And it will be a sign on your hand and a symbol on your forehead that the Lord brought us up out of Egypt. Something for you to remember. Now, if we go back to verse, well, let's just read on a little bit. Let's go to verse 17. When Pharaoh let the people go, God did not lead them on the road through the Philistine country, though that was the shorter way, for God said if they faced war, they might change their minds and return to Egypt. So he led the people around by the desert road toward the Red Sea, and the Israelites went up out of Egypt ready for battle. Now, isn't it interesting in that first paragraph that God led them around the shortest way, because the shortest way was down the coastal road, which took them through the land of the Philistines. God says he doesn't think these guys are ready for war. Remember, they're just coming out of Egypt. But yet, at the end of this, it says, the Israelites went up out of Egypt ready for battle. The Israelites think they're ready for war. The Israelites just came out of Egypt in a victorious time. They left in the middle of the night with God's blessing. And as you remember, they plundered Egypt on the way out. Took everything they wanted. Jewelry, fine, clothes, linens, anything they wanted, they were given just to get rid of them. And then they found out, they being the Egyptians, that they lost their wealth and their slaves or workforce. And it took them a day or so to figure out maybe this wasn't the best idea. So they go after them. This status of the Jews is we're ready for battle. God's view of them, I'll lead them away from it for now. So God sends them on a southern route, and I'm sorry I don't have the pictures to show you. There were several this morning. I didn't know Beverly was going to be out this week. So we don't have pictures. So you're going to have to picture this in your mind, like the old days. Nobody knows how to run it. So they take a southern route, headed down toward the Red Sea. This was by direction of God, who is leading them how? He is physically leading them how? How? Help me, Bill. Here it comes. Pillar of cloud by day, pillar of fire by night. That gives them leading, it gives them shade in the desert, and it gives them heat at night. Pretty smart guy. And it gives them the ability to do something else. They can physically see the presence of God right in front of them. Pretty hard to deny a pillar of cloud during the day and a pillar of fire at night. So you could set up your tent, walk out the door, and you say, well, I don't have to be worried about whether God is present. There he is. Now, something else happened, which I found very unique. They took a coffin with them that belonged to Joseph. Why did they take that coffin with them? First of all, let's set this up. When Joseph died, he had told them in chapter 13, take my bones with you when you leave, because you are leaving. In fact, let's read verse 19. Chapter 13, verse 19 says, Moses took the bones of Joseph with him because Joseph had made the Israelites swear an oath. He had said, this is Joseph, he had said, God will surely come to your aid, and then you must carry my bones with you from this place. Joseph had made them swear to take them with him when they left, which should tell you, as you hear this, we must be leaving. The only thing I don't know is when that's happening. And as it turned out, it takes almost 400 years. They had to wait a long time. So they had to go through several generations to get to this point. You remember me reading you a minute ago in chapter 13, verse 14, in the days to come, when your son asks you, generations, what does this mean? Say to him, with a mighty hand the Lord brought us up out of Egypt, out of the land of slavery. That's what you're to remember. Now I've got a coffin, and interesting enough, Brian, they never buried the coffin. So, complete coffin. They did not cremate him. They buried his bones. He's in the box. And this box was sitting on some type of a pedestal. It was a monument, and they could see that. Stay with me, I'm going somewhere. So you could be walking to the grocery store, and if you were going in the right path, you'd walk by the monument of Joseph. Good morning, how you doing? How come we're still here? These are here because you said we're leaving, going to Canaan. Take my bones with you. That's why they never buried him. He's still waiting, and we haven't left. 400 years. This would be a reminder to the Israelites, there's a promise. What is the promise? We're going home. We're going to a place that God is preparing for us. This sounds like something you may have heard before. We're going home.
But don't you sometimes think, if that was going to be their land, why the Lord allowed other people to inhabit it?
Why is that?
Yeah, why is that?
You know, they took it from him.
I know.
These guys had, we know of more than 400 years because they were there prior to the Jews going to Egypt. That was 400 years earlier. These guys were idol worshipers. These guys had hundreds and hundreds of years to turn to God. And they did not. And God finally took it from them. Enough's enough. But I don't want you to lose focus. There's a coffin with Joseph's bones and a promise. When you leave, you got to take me with you. that coffin also should remind them of their past, how they got there, and remind them there's a future. You're taking me with you when you leave. Now, do you find that kind of odd? Okay, I was hoping someone would say that. Do we have anything like that today? Be careful what you say here. Some people have. Do we have anything like that today?
I mean, Jesus went to go prepare a place for us.
Is that a promise?
Yeah.
Is that a destination?
Yes.
Are you talking about the promised land again?
Yes.
The New Jerusalem, or the new city, even has a name.
Be more specific.
I'm going to. I'm just setting you up.
Yeah, the question's too broad.
Young man, put your phone down. Stand up. Go right back there and get that flag and bring it up here to the front. Yep, the U.S. flag. Yeah, hurry up. What is this that's coming up here? Whoops. Whoops. What do you see? A coffin. This has the same representation as the bones of Joseph in a coffin. Let me show you how. Tell me what this represents. And you can do this with something you learned in school. I pledge allegiance. What's that mean? What else does that mean? Devotion. When you pledge, that's a personal promise from you that you're aligning yourself with what this means. I pledge what? Allegiance. What's allegiance mean? You're never going to believe where I got this from. I didn't believe it. Debbie and I were talking about this yesterday. No, it was, but close. It was from Debbie. Close. I asked her, what does that mean to you? And she says, the flag. And that set me to thinking on the rest of this. I pledge allegiance. That means you're aligning yourself with what this stands for. Right? I pledge allegiance to what? To the flag. Now, what is that specific flag representing? Of the United States. Do you hear unity? I think we've heard that spoke of in this church, in this Sunday school lesson or class several times. Jesus promoted unity. This is a Christian philosophy. To the United States of America. Keep going. And to the republic for which it stands. This is a republic, not a democracy, as a lot of people talk about. Are you shaking your head yes? Am I reaching you? The republic for which it stands. One nation. Indivisible. What does indivisible mean? Cannot be broken apart. undivided, with liberty. What did I leave out? Say it again. Those are the bones of Joseph, reminding you of what you are aligning yourself to. The under God we have forgot. One nation. That means we're in unity, not division. Under God. An indivisible with liberty and justice for all. When I thought about this is Joseph's coffin. Another representation that reminds you of who you are and where we're going. And we take that today so lightly because we have forgot what the word I pledge allegiance means. They did it every day when I went to school.
Why did they stop this? They shouldn't have stopped that. The kids coming up aren't even gonna know. Well, they won't even know the Pledge of Allegiance to say it. They won't know it.
I guess I need to read you this verse again. In days to come, when your sons ask you what you just finished saying, what does this mean? And you say to them, with a mighty hand the Lord brought us out of Egypt. That's what those bones meant. That those kids don't know anything about because they weren't there. It's up to you to tell them, this is what this means. Well, has that changed for this? Let me tell you something. I will venture to guess that these kids don't have the same meaning for that flag as my uncles who went to war in World War II. Or Vietnam. Or Afghanistan.
Put his life on the line for that flag.
And you know why they don't know? Because we haven't told them. We haven't showed them. I pledge allegiance. I pledge allegiance. I give my solemn promise to the flag of the United States of America and the republic for which it stands. We're still leaving out God. As a matter of fact, not only have we left him out, we've left him out of our schools.
And now look what's happening at the schools, shooting each other.
We left God out of our lives. I hate to say this, but there are many churches sitting in Phoenix at this very moment that leave God out of their church. It's a show.
Well, New Age churches do not discuss God at all.
Genesis 50:26 says, Then Joseph took an oath from the children of Israel, saying, God will surely visit you, and you shall carry my bones from here. So Joseph died being 110 years old, and they embalmed him, and he was put in a coffin in Egypt. According to this passage, and in Hebrews 11:22, Joseph was never buried. His coffin lay above ground for 400 or so years until it was taken back to Canaan. It was a silent witness for all those years that Israel was going back to the promised land just as God had said. This was faith because it trusted God's promise to his people. This was faith because it knew where God's people belonged. This was faith because it looked to the future. This was faith because it proclaimed God's faithful promise in a way possible, even through a dead man's bones. So they could walk by that coffin that was on display, and they could remember God's promises. They could remember where they came from. They could bless you, how they got there, and they could remember where they're going. And I propose to you we can do that today. Now, to make it even more vivid, verse 20. After leaving Succoth, they camped at Etham on the edge of the desert. By day the Lord went ahead of them in a pillar of a cloud to guide them on their way, and by night in a pillar of fire to give them light, so that they could travel by day and night. Neither the pillar of cloud by the day nor the pillar of fire by the night left its place in front of the people. It was constant. It was reassuring. It was a physical thing that they had, that they could look and literally say, there's the presence of God. And the side effects or the after effects of that would also be, we must be a blessed people to have the presence of God. Because God wasn't everywhere. He was with them. He chose to be with them. They didn't pray and ask God to come. God chose to be with them. God chooses to be with you. They could take that with them. They could also take, and then they were about to find out, there's something else that comes with the presence of God in your life. What happens when the Egyptians finally showed up? The cloud moved behind them.
Yeah. And they couldn't go through it. They wouldn't go through it.
The cloud moved behind them and separated them from the Egyptians. What else does God's presence bring? Protection. Protection. Now, when the Jews came out of Egypt, God purposely avoided contact with Philistines. They took the long way around instead of the short route. And it also says in chapter 14, God said to Moses, tell the Israelites to turn back and encamp at Pi-hahiroth between Migdol and the sea. They are to camp by the sea, directly opposite Baal-Zephon. Pharaoh will think the Israelites are wandering around the land in confusion. hemmed in by the desert. And I will harden Pharaoh's heart, and he will pursue them. But I will gain glory for myself through Pharaoh and all of his army, and the Egyptians will know that I am the Lord. So the Israelites did this. They're wandering in the desert, and let's make sure we clarify so I can paint you a picture. We're talking about more than 1 million people here. This isn't a group of a couple of hundred. This is a group of 1 to 3 million. This is a big deal. This is half of Phoenix moving out. Wouldn't it be nice if they left today? Let's send them to Egypt. So this is a big deal, Bill, and they're wandering around, and now they're backtracking and retracing some of their steps. This makes them look like they're in confusion. They took the wrong road. They're wandering around in the desert. They don't know what they're doing. Let's go get them back. And then, of all things, Moses has them camp at a spot next to a shoreline of the Red Sea where there is no escape. Worst place militarily they could have camped. What is God doing? Is he lost? Does he not know how to lead? How many times in your life has God led you down a path and you wondered, what is he really doing? And the Egyptians are watching this, and they're saying, this is easy pickings. We'll just go get them and get them back. They don't even know where they're going. If there is method to the madness, you'll have to explain it to me. What's going on here? Why is God making such poor decisions? Or at least that's what the appearance here is before we read a little further. There is a method to the madness, isn't there? The appearance of confusion was not confusion. They were following the leading of God. Why has God got them going in circles? Because there's eyes watching them that think they're in confusion. And what's happening? God is setting them up. And he's going to decimate what's left of the Egyptian forces. This was the richest and most powerful country in the world. And in a matter of a couple of days, it becomes the poorest. Their money's gone. Their slave labor's gone, and now they're about to lose their army.
I read somewhere that history shows that there was a long period of time when Egypt was vacant during around that time.
They became desolate in a matter of days. You talk about God bringing total judgment on this country. They're about to experience it firsthand. So God sees the army coming. And I hate to put it this way, David, but it almost looks like he was using the Jews as bait. Watch this. And the Jews are going to watch the total deliverance from God. Now, the Jews don't see it that way at the time. You remember in verse 18, I read, it says, so God led the people around by the desert road toward the Red Sea, and the Israelites went up out of Egypt, ready for battle. They were ready for battle, so they thought. But when we go down, I'm going to skip some of this for time. In verse 10 of chapter 14. As Pharaoh approached, the Israelites looked up, and the Egyptians were marching after them. They were terrified and cried out to the Lord, and they said to Moses, was it because we have no graves in Egypt that you brought us out to the desert to die? What have you done to us by bringing us out of Egypt? Didn't we say to you in Egypt, leave us alone, let us serve the Egyptians? It would have been better for us to serve the Egyptians than to die in the desert. That does not sound like the verse I just read you when they came out of Egypt and they said they were ready for battle. What happened? They got confronted by a superior army and they panicked. Now they're accusing Moses of being a bad leader. They're accusing Moses of taking them out of Egypt unprepared, without a good plan. And he plants them at a place where they have no escape. And now they see this army coming. And all of a sudden, they're a nation without God again. Except he hasn't left. He's between them and the Egyptians. Even though the Jews are abandoning God, God is not abandoning the Jews. Verse 13, Moses answered the people and said, "Don't be afraid. Stand firm and you will see the deliverance the Lord will bring you today." Well, not all of them lost their faith. The Lord will fight for you. You need only to be still. What was the direction that Moses gives those people from God? Be still. Be still. God will make a way when for his people, when circumstances seem bleak. Let me say that again. God will lead his people and make a way when circumstances seem bleak. Seem bleak. There's no way out of this but God. The boldness is gone now. They're looking for somebody to blame. But God is still in control. Moses answered the people and said, "Don't be afraid." In verse 15, the Lord said to Moses, "Why are you crying out to me? Tell the Israelites to move on." I like that. What are you crying to me about? You've got the promise. You know what they had? They still had a pillar of fire right in front of them that had moved now behind them and the attacking army. And they still had a coffin in their midst to remind them not only where they came from, but where they're going to. And they're abandoning all that because of the circumstances that they see with their eyes. And their eyes tell them no. Their hearts, David should have told them yes. And that is exactly what Moses told them. Be still. You're carrying a promise. You've even got it with you. All I hear on the news today is doom and gloom and how this country is falling apart. You know how to fix this country? Do what you promised to do. One nation, I leave this out because we have left it out. Maybe it's time to put it back under God. Where are all the people that are saying, "Oh my God, we need to separate church and state"? I want to tell you something. Do you know there were 56 signers of the Declaration of Independence? Have you ever Googled and see what happened to those 56 signers? You should do that. Almost all of them suffered some kind of consequence as a signer on that document. 9 of them died almost immediately in war. Several lost their sons. Several more who were landowners lost their land in the war and were decimated and went broke. Some died as paupers. The cost to sign that document was enormous. And you don't know that, and that is part of that. The price that was paid for that to be here this morning is the same price that the Jews had to be reminded of. For 400 years they were slaves. They paid a price. They had to turn back to God to get God to help them. It said that God heard their cries. Maybe God should hear our cries. I don't think this country's hard to fix. I think we have to be reminded of how we started this country. You make a promise that you don't even know about continuing or containing. You're promising yourself to follow what that says. And part of the words in that we've taken out, which say, under God. We leave that part out now. Well, the Jews tried that and it didn't work very well. And God says to them in verse 15, the Lord cried out to Moses, "Why are you crying out to me? Tell the Israelites, move on. They have everything they need to move on." And then he shows them what move on means. And all of a sudden, the trap that they're in with no escape, there is an escape. Verse 16, raise your staff and stretch out your hand over the sea to divide the water so the Israelites can go through the sea on dry ground. It will harden the hearts of the Egyptians so that they will go after them. And I will gain glory through Pharaoh and all his army, through his chariots and horsemen. The Egyptians will know that I am the Lord when I gain glory through Pharaoh, his chariots, and his horsemen. The angel of God, who has been traveling in front of the Israel army, withdrew and went behind them. The pillar of a cloud also moved from in front and stood behind them, coming between the armies of Egypt and Israel. Throughout the night, the cloud brought darkness to one side and light to the other, so neither went near the other all night long. And when Moses stretched out his hand over the sea, and all that night the Lord drove back the sea with a strong east wind and turned it into dry land. The waters divided, and the Israelites went through the sea on dry ground with a wall of water on their right and another on their left. And the Egyptians pursued them, and all Pharaoh's horses, chariots, horsemen followed them into the sea. And during the last watch of the night, the Lord looked down from the pillar of fire and cloud at the Egyptian army and threw it into confusion. He jammed the wheels of the chariots so they had difficulty driving. And the Egyptians said, "Let's get away from the Israelites." And here is a telling verse. They say, as in unity now, the army, the Lord's fighting for them against Egypt. They have seen the power of God, but it's too late. The Lord is fighting for them against Egypt. We're in the wrong place at the wrong time. And the Hebrews, the Jews, are watching all of this. Be still. Then the Lord said to Moses, "Stretch out your hand over the sea so that the waters may flow back over the Egyptians and their chariots and horsemen." Moses stretched out his hand over the sea, And the daybreak, and the sea went back in its place, and the Egyptians were fleeing toward it, and the Lord swept them into the sea. The water flowed back and covered the chariots and horsemen, and the entire army of Pharaoh that had followed the Israelites into the sea. Not one of them survived. Verse 21, and when the Israelites saw the mighty hand of the Lord displayed against the Egyptians, the people feared the Lord and put their trust in him and in Moses his servant. That is not the same definition of people or description of people that we just read less than a chapter earlier. They wanted to know what you have done to us to let us die in the desert. And after seeing the physical miracles of God, it strengthened their faith enough to believe you're the real deal.
Until they got hungry and thirsty again.
3 days later.
They started complaining.
It doesn't seem to last. When we see God's power, our faith is strengthened. But as David points out, it doesn't seem to last. We've seen miracles take place in the front of this church. But it doesn't seem to last. If miracles don't make your faith grow, what does?
Evidently, I mean, everything that they saw getting out of Egypt, the plagues, the Passover, now this dividing of the sea.
Remember who we're talking about. They also got loaded up wealthy. You realize they left Egypt, plundering Egypt. Now they're one of the richest countries on earth in one night. It wasn't the money that kept them. It wasn't even the physical miracles they saw that kept them. It wasn't Moses reassuring them that kept them strong. Why do they keep losing their vision of God? Who happens, I remind you, to be physically a representation of Him right in front of them.
Maybe they expect it to keep happening over and over again.
Not only did they expect it, Paula, it had to keep happening because they keep wanting to kill Moses and go home. Home for them is not the promised land. Where is home for them?
Egypt.
They want to go back to Egypt.
Nice and easy, 3 hops and a
Wasn't easy. So all they were doing is whining about the work. As a matter of fact, Pharaoh took the straw away. It said it made it even harder on them. They prefer that to going to the promised land? What are they thinking? Let's go back to the familiar instead of going to the promised land? Oh, come on. You know why that doesn't make as much sense to you? Because you have had a vision or a glimpse of the promised land. Paul doesn't tell you about it, but there's all these little hints that keep showing up in the Bible. And what your vision of what heaven looks like might be different than mine. But one thing I think we could all agree upon, it's good. And we have not talked to anybody who would come back. It's good, Sister Clark. flag. That's a now thing for today. And we can relate to that. And we can also, Linda, relate to how people can turn away from God. And we look at that and say, how could that possibly happen? How could someone who knew God turn away from God? How could we have a country who was founded on Christian principles abandon those principles? And we pledge allegiance to a symbol that represents our country, and we don't even realize what we're saying anymore. God help us. We've turned into Israel. And you know what? I have a belief with these young people sitting here, we can turn back. You're a difference maker. Somebody has to stand up and say, do you know what you just said when you said, I pledge allegiance?
No. It's promise.
God help us. God help us. Father, I want you to do what you do, Lord. Release this into people's hearts, Lord. Let them mull this over. Let them apply this to themselves, Lord. Let them glean and learn from this, Lord, and let it change their attitudes and their lives. And then use them, Lord, with the knowledge that you provided them to change someone else. In Jesus' name, and everyone said, and I'm done.